Welcome, wanderer. You found your way into the shadows. Here, stories are not just told. They breathe, they whisper, and they wait for you in the dark. Dim the lights, silence the world, and listen closely, because every story has a way of finding you. The one day I woke up late may have saved my life. I've told this story in other places, on other accounts before, but it bears repeating. One day when I was in elementary school, I think probably 3rd or 4th grade, I was awoken by my mum in a rush. She had overslept, and since she always woke me up in the morning, this meant that I too overslept. And now there was no way I was going to be ready for school early enough to get on the bus. If I remember correctly, school started at 8 a.m. My bus pickup time was 7 a.m, but it was already 6:40 or something and I was still in my pyjamas. I hadn't even had breakfast yet. So Mum decided that today we would just tell the bus driver to go on ahead and she would take me to school, which would give me plenty of time to get ready. So I'm sitting there at the dining table eating breakfast, still in my pyjamas, and it's now about 6:50. We hear the bus pull up about 10 minutes earlier than usual. My mum peeks her head out of the door into the foggy morning and waves the bus on. She closes the door and comes back inside, but the bus doesn't pull away. There's a knock at the door. My mum opens it to find a man in a bus driver uniform. He explains that he's a substitute bus driver because the regular driver called in sick. He says he knows he's a few minutes early since he wanted to get an early start on the route since he didn't know it well. My mum explains to him that she's going to take me to school since I woke up so late. He gets visibly upset and says that he can wait a few minutes since he's already ahead of time. My mum insists that no, I won't be ready for a few minutes and tells him to go on ahead. He seemed angry about this, but turned around, got back in the bus, and left. I returned to eating my breakfast, and I still don't have my school clothes on at this point, but I think at 7 a.m. sharp another bus pulls up to my house. My mum thinks this is weird and goes outside to talk to them. She comes back inside looking terrified, but doesn't really say anything about it and tells me to finish getting ready for school. At the time, I didn't know what had happened, but my mum would end up telling me a few years later. When she went to the second bus, she found that it was being driven by the regular bus driver, and it was full of all the other kids that are usually picked up on the route. The other bus was empty, by the way. My mum asked the driver about the substitute driver and about him calling in sick. I never called in sick. There's no substitute driver on my route, he said. The driver immediately called dispatch in a panic and told my mum to go inside and call the police, which she did without me knowing, and report this incident. There was absolutely no one doing my driver's route that day. Whoever this was most likely the kidnapper who had targeted me. I never heard anything about it again, not even if someone had ended up being picked up by this mysterious fake bus driver, but chances are, had I gotten on that bus, I would never have made it to school or back home, and if my mum hadn't overslept on that day, I would have been on that bus and tried to find me. A few years ago, I was renting a house in Northern California. The neighborhood was just outside the suburbs. It seemed like the perfect balance of having space and nice neighbours, close enough to not feel isolated. The area had no streetlights, so it was very dark at night, especially if there were clouds blocking the moonlight. It didn't bother me though. It made my little house feel even more quaint on dark nights. I got home from work one day in midwinter. It was a cloudy night, so I was pulling up to my house. I saw only what my headlights and front porch lights illuminated. When I got out of my car, I caught a whiff of cigarette smoke. That was odd, as I'd never smelled that before around the house. I didn't see anyone nearby, so I ignored it and went inside. I had just got off of a shift, a few hours of overtime, so I was pretty tired. Even though it wasn't even 7 yet, I decided to take a shower and call it a night. I woke up sometime later, sure that I heard a noise inside my house. I wasn't worried right away because my friend would sometimes stop by and use my shower after work on his way to night classes. I even gave him a spare key so he could stop by if I wasn't home. He would always text me to let me know beforehand though, and I hadn't heard my phone go off. I reached over to my bedside table and picked up my cell phone to see if my friend had sent me a text. The bright light from my phone's screen and number pad blinded me. These were the days before phones had a light sensor that would dim the screen in the dark, and this particular phone was so bright I could use it as a flashlight. Through squinted eyes, I could make out that it was 9 or something, but I couldn't tell if I had an unread text or not. I set my phone aside and called out my friend's name. There was a couple of seconds of silence before I heard loud footfalls as someone started running through the bottom floor of my house. I leapt out of bed and ran to the closet. They were already up the stairs by the time I had opened the door and stepped inside. That house had 3 rooms upstairs, 2 bedrooms on either side of the hallway, the one I was in and a spare, and a bathroom at the end. The bedroom doors were both closed, but the bathroom door was cracked open. I heard whoever was in my house thunder down the hallway, past my door and into the bathroom. Thank God he did. That gave me enough time to open up the attic access in the ceiling of my closet and hoist myself up. I had just started to lift myself up when the person ran back out of the bathroom. My feet were barely inside of the attic when my bedroom door burst open. I heard footsteps run into my room and stop. When they didn't see me in the room, they ran back to the hallway and into the other room, which just had boxes stacked in a corner, some weights, and a table where I painted my miniature models. I guess they decided that if someone was hiding, it would be in the bedroom, because they charged back into my room and turned on the light. A moment later, the closet door was ripped open. I was crouched in my attic just a foot or so away from the access, so I could try to stop them if they started to climb up. From my vantage point, all I could see was about their knee down. They were wearing dirty blue jeans with a frayed cuff and worn work boots. After a few seconds of looking in the closet, they stepped away, and I heard a loud crash come from my room, followed by a scream of frustration and anger. The scream, that was the most unnerving part of the incident for me. It reminded me far too much of my stepfather, who would scream in a similar way when he lost his temper. He would eventually be put into a mental hospital for several mental disorders and resulted in erratic and violent tendencies. The man in my house ran back downstairs. I heard crashes and clatters as things were thrown around and furniture was knocked over. I stayed crouched in the attic. I had left my cell phone when I ran for the closet, and I wasn't certain I could climb down without him hearing. After some time, the noises stopped. I started counting slowly. When I reached 1,000, I decided it was safe enough to climb down and call the police. The first thing I noticed when I exited the closet was the intruder had flipped my bed over. I assumed in an attempt to find me. That was the loud noise I had heard after he stepped away from the closet. I couldn't find my cell phone, so I went to the landline by the bed and called the police. I waited in my room until I heard them call out from downstairs. The first floor was a mess. I had expected that. Chairs had been knocked over, the sofa had been flipped, all the books, pictures and knickknacks I had on my shelves were strewn across the floor. The cupboards in my kitchen had been opened, and all the boxes and canned foods had been thrown on the ground. As far as I could tell though, the only thing missing was a single knife out of the wooden block in my kitchen. The police checked the house from top to bottom. They found that the side door had been forced open with something like a crowbar. They also found a few cigarette butts along my fence line, with some foil and an empty pen tube which the police said was often used to smoke meth, so they think he'd been watching my house for a while. I realised that he must have been out there smoking a cigarette when I got home. They collected up the evidence and told me I should stay with family or friends that night and that I should get my door fixed as soon as possible. I opted to just not sleep. I moved a shelf over to block the broken door and spent the next couple of hours cleaning things up. I would often go to the window with a flashlight and shine it along the fence line where the police found the cigarette butts and foil, but I didn't see anything. The next day, I called to have the door fixed and motion lights installed at the back and sides of my house. I ran a phone cable up to the attic and added a landline. I never wanted to be stuck up there without a phone again. Nothing else happened at that house though. I lived there for another 3 years without incident. One more precaution I took was practicing getting out of my bed, going closer to my closet and climbing into the attic as quickly and quietly as possible. I even kept at it when I moved, except now that I go into a crawl space at the back of my closet instead of an attic. I try not to think about what would happen if I had been a bit slower in getting to the attic, or if he hadn't gone into the bathroom at the end of the hall first. I am never going exploring ever again. Now this is something I really want to talk about to be sure that everyone is cautious and stays level-headed at all times. Now for context, I lived in the middle of nowhere in Canada. It was an old town that had quite a few abandoned buildings due to absence of residents. Me and many friends were tired of the lack of entertainment options for us, so what we did was explore these abandoned buildings. Prior to the experience I'm about to talk about, we never had anything too crazy happen to us. Occasionally, we'd see a small bit of blood-like liquid, and we did see a pentagram on the ground from someone who had went into the house previously, but nothing too bad, until the last time I'd gone exploring abandoned buildings. Now when I was younger, I used to go to daycare that was part mental hospital. Weird combination, I know. It closed down due to a lack of patients and lack of children at the daycare. I decided to go back there with my friends a few years ago. For context, I was 15 when this happened. Most of my friends were the same age. When we did get there, it was rather cliche. There was fog, it was rather dark, and there was a light drizzle of rain. We went to the main gate, which was padlocked shut. We decided to help each other hop over it and made a ton of noise. We were laughing and giggling the whole time, unsuspecting of what was to come. We looked around the small play place or park with flashlights we had on our person. Even with our somewhat powerful flashlights, our visibility was rather limited. We decided to enter the daycare building. Glass and dirt crunched under our feet as we stepped into the daycare section of the complex. There was still old Lego, wood chips from previous furniture, old torn dolls and toys strewn about. The further we walked around the daycare section, we naturally became more and more silent, until all we could hear was the crunch of the dirt under our feet. I found some crayons in a plastic container in the corner of the room. I walked over to pick them up, when all of a sudden we heard a loud crash coming from behind a metal door leading to the psych ward part of the building. My friends and I all looked at each other. As a whole, we were a group of 5 of the most bold and cocky boys. We all looked at each other when my friend Brian suggested that we go look to see where the sound came from. Personally, I was not too fond of the idea, but with my group of friends, there was no way anybody was going to decline such a thing. We all stacked up to the door and opened it. It was rusted to the floor and we heaved to get it open. As we walked in, the metallic smells became stronger, with a hint of something else I couldn't put my finger on at that moment. We walked in, our flashlights pointed in every direction, with Brian leading the group. The hallways were tight, and to the left and right were occasional metal doorways, some doors open. I felt slightly claustrophobic, and it felt a little hard to breathe. As we continued, Brian shone his flashlight into a room and recoiled. We all stopped walking as Brian slowly entered the room. "What is it?" I asked him. I thought I saw someone in here. It all seems fine now." To be honest, I thought he was messing with us to increase our anxiety, but looking back, I think he was completely honest. He backed out of the room and we continued walking deeper into the psych ward, when another friend swiftly told us to stop. We came to a halt and all listened. In the distance, ahead of us, we heard the subtle pitter-patter of footsteps echo through the hallway. We all looked at each other, fear in our eyes. Brian continued walking towards the sounds. We considered turning back for a second, without Brian, wondering if some ghost or something was in the building, but we couldn't do that to him. The closer we got, the more it felt like I was being watched. When finally we entered a room on the right which had the smell of rotting meat. In front of us was a dead deer. Its innards were spilled all over the floor, staining the concrete. A friend of mine had a really weak stomach and vomited all over the floor. That's when we heard whispering from somewhere. Brian shone his flashlight to the corner of the room where a man with short hair was standing, head down. He wore a bright green t-shirt stained with what I assume was blood, and torn beige pants. He didn't have any socks and his feet seemed damaged. He was twitching sporadically and continued to mumble even after we saw him. We stared at him for a solid 30 seconds before he made his first movement. He looked up at us with a haunting grin that sent shivers down our spine. "You guys here for the feast?" he said, each word with varying inflection and energy. This kicked us over the edge and we bolted out of that room all the way back to the daycare centre. The door was still open and we decided to try and slam it shut, but the rust and pure weight of the door almost kept it open. It took 3 of us pulling with all our strength to close it, and just before we did, I could still see the silhouette of a man watching us, his white teeth being the only other human feature I could see. We sat behind the metal door, catching our breath for a second, all looking at each other for confirmation that we all saw the same thing. After a little bit of laboured breathing from each of us, we heard a light tapping on the door. That's when we decided that it was time to leave. We booked out of the vicinity completely and ran home. A year after we visited that spot, police went back to do a routine search of the area and found the man. It was stated that this guy used to go to the psych ward before it closed down. He escaped the facility he was transferred to and lived off the wilderness around the complex. When the cops brought him in, he had a series of diseases and sickness from eating raw meat. His mental condition was much worse than before. There were future rumours that he did kill someone in the forest searching for food, but nothing has been confirmed. In the end, guys, be careful, especially in dangerous areas such as abandoned buildings. And creepy dude, let's not meet. And so, another story slips back into the shadows. If it followed you home, don't blame me. Some tales linger with us. If you enjoyed wandering in the dark with me tonight, make sure to subscribe, share the fear, and return for more. Until then, keep your doors locked, trust no whisper in the dark, and remember, the next story might be yours.